Hello friends, today we are going to make a side dish. It's called bruschetta, or if you care to say it in English with a little Italian accent, bruschetta, B-R-U-C-H-E-T-T-A. So what we need for this recipe: tomatoes, basil, and olive oil, and some kind of bread, a mini loaf. I have here a whole grain, multi-grain baguette. Basically, this is just a small loaf of French bread. So, because it's whole grain, it's better for my parents. Again, talking about their diabetes and keeping that under control. So that is the theme again for this video. So what we want to do is probably make this bruschetta first. So I've already washed the tomatoes, and I'm going to get my little handy dandy knife. And what I'm going to do with the tomato is I'm going to actually dice it. And these again are small Campari tomatoes, which again have a really good flavor, perfect size for a lot of things, dishes that call for tomatoes. So this one's a little ripe, so it's not cutting as easily. So ideally this should be, this should cut very easily. So I'm gonna go with the bigger knife, see if that's any sharper. And yes, it is. So we'll go with this. Okay, so dicing the tomatoes. And also there's another way to dice tomatoes, which other people may do, and I will do it with the next one. You just cut the last little bits of this one and cube it. Alright, there's that one. And if you want to do it another way, that's perhaps a little easier. You can hold it on its side, slice it in half. Don't put the knife all the way through, but you can go ahead and cut. Again, unsharp knife. They've been in storage for a while. Cut all the way down until the bottom that you left intact, and then dice. And again, remember to keep your fingers tucked under so that you don't cut. Cut yourself, which is easily done. So again, any way you choose to dice the tomatoes is fine, so long as they're diced. So by no means do you have to follow the method that I'm using for cutting the tomatoes. So okay, again, and then dice across. Piece that's a little too big. Okay, so next thing after this, and again, you need to be careful with sodium for my father, but I just sent a care package to Chicago, and there is now a condiment there that says new salt, and it is a salt substitute that has no sodium, so it is okay for him to have that. Okay, so that said, about the sodium and the new salt, I'm going to go ahead and put just a little bit of salt here. And again, this is kosher salt. And you only need a few granules. Goes a long way. And then the next thing I am going to do is cut the basil. And because I have more of my tools, I can actually do this a little bit easier and less work. So it smells so good. Basil is one of my favorites. Okay, so again, we are going to use the method that I talked about in another video called chiffonade, and that is tucking all of the leaves, nesting all of the leaves together, and then chopping them, and when you're done, they look like chiffon, like the material chiffon. So these are a little bit smaller than what we used in one of the other recipes, which is fine because These are just very few tomatoes that I'm using here, so this is okay to use these small ones. It's probably better because the smaller that you can chop them, again, my mother, taking into account her hallucinations, using this method will hopefully get her to eat. And she does like bread, so this recipe has a little bit of everything that she likes: tomatoes, olive oil, and bread. So I'm chopping this just a little bit smaller because, again, if you take into consideration my mom's eating habits, then cutting it smaller makes sense. Okay, so now we're just gonna put that on top. You can also use dry basil in this recipe, and you don't have to use quite so much because it's stronger when it's in dry form. So I don't have a spoon here, so I'm going to use this measuring spoon and then just mix that all together. And then we are going to, and if you see, this is what the salt does when you put it onto tomatoes. It releases some of the juice. It waters the tomato. So that's really good because when you put it on bread, it's kind of tasty because the juice soaks into the bread. Okay, so the next ingredient, we want just a little bit of olive oil. So for this amount, I'm going to use 1/4 teaspoon. And that should be plenty because you're also going to sprinkle the bread, or you're going to actually brush some tomato or some olive oil on the bread. So just need very little here. Okay, so mixing that. Put this aside, and I'm happy to say that more and more things are coming out of storage, so we can actually do some things that we weren't able to do before. So next, what we're going to do is we are going to cut the bread, and again, getting knife specific, have a bread knife serrated in a long blade. So I'm just going to cut the bread at an angle and actually use smaller pieces because for my parents, actually it's probably easier this way because I'm right-handed. For my parents, they have to really be careful with bread, and actually you have to be pretty careful about serving them too many carbs in a meal. So this is a pretty hefty amount of carbohydrates for them, and I would think that 2 small pieces for them would be sufficient and they'd be happy with that. So then we're going to go ahead and just lay the bread out here and take our olive oil and just brush some of that olive oil onto the bread, just a little bit, because we're going to toast this, and the toasting will certainly brown this a little quicker than had you not put olive oil on it. So we have our bread with olive oil lightly brushed on. I have a toaster oven now too. I don't want to pull the camera up because we've got it in perfect position so you can see what I'm doing. So there is a toaster oven at my mom and dad's house, and you can do this. I might suggest that if you're doing bread, because that is such a small little toaster oven, that you put foil underneath so that it doesn't get all crummy and burnt pieces of bread from the olive oil. So I'm just going to go ahead and start this and toast it. And we don't really need to do it very long. So when it comes out, we'll have clean up here a little bit. To do the next step of the recipe, which is the bread toasted. So you don't want it toasted so dark that it's crunchy, and and my parents can't bite it easily, chew it easily. So just a real light little toast. You want to keep a close eye on the toast in the toaster oven because it's whole grain, and for some reason whole grain toasts a little bit faster, so you really want to keep your eye on it and make sure that it's not getting too brown. And so I'm going to go ahead and stop this right now and pull out the pieces, and you see how the olive oil is actually now soaked into the bread. And then adding the tomatoes, it's just going to be a little bit juicier and a little bit nicer with the tomato juice soaking into the bread as well. So I've got all my little pieces of bread here, and all we're going to do is take a little scoop and put it on the little piece of toast. And if there is cheese, then Parmesan, fresh Parmesan, is actually preferable to the canned stuff. Who knows what's in that canned stuff, but it's probably not good for you. So anyway, fresh Parmesan cheese grated over the bread, and you can either melt it or just leave it fresh on the piece of bread. And there you have it. Bruschetta. Until the next time.